Fresh and
All right, welcome back to another episode of Fresh and Buds. I am your host, Tommy Fresh, and you are all my buds. And today I am joined by a bud, Mr. Roger Bodee from the Manor Podcast, which, you know what? I'm going to be honest. I always want to say MNR Podcast.
Yeah, we'll take either.
At this point, Roger, you know, I'm happy to have you on here. Obviously, we've had your co-host on, Mr. Michael Hamilton, and I thought, gotta get the other guy on, right? You know, we can't just have one half. So this could be a lot of fun, and we're going to talk a little bit, about Roger, and then we're going to kind of jump into just talk about the Indianapolis Calling, which is coming up this weekend if you're listening to it as this is released on Thursday, and talk about what we can expect, I think, because this will be the first big tournament post-bans, and also you know, what's going on in Indianapolis as a city. So this should be fun. But before we get to all that, I do want to shout out to the Patreon, which you can find in the show notes. Helps keep the mics hot, the lights on. Every little bit helps, and certainly not required. I know we're all feeling the squeeze right now, you know, with you know how the economy's been going, but I am very grateful for anyone who does join, and you get some cool perks in there, like bonus episodes. You get to see the packs that Gary and I don't open on the Bud Rush Bellow on there, and you also get a sticker and a Romping Club membership card, which also gives you access to a Patreon exclusive channel in the Buds Discord, which is free for anybody, the Buds Discord, which you can also find in the show notes. And also want to shout out to the Bud Rush Bellow, the live podcast I do with Mr. Viz, aka Gary, on Wednesday evenings, 9:30 Eastern, where we kind of keep it pretty silly, a lot of fun. It's live, so you can tune in. It's on YouTube. It's visual, much like this podcast is now too. But for the listeners who aren't on the YouTube, check it out. Give us a little like, comment, subscribe. Every little bit helps. And once we get to 500 subscribers, I will be doing a full Levia cosplay on stream, and it will be miserable. So we'll see how that goes. But enough of that nonsense. Let's get to Mr. Roger. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm just peachy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. You know, it's been busy. Getting ready for the calling, and I'm sure you have as well. So we're going to kind of jump into that, but I'm excited for this weekend. Are you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you're getting into it now, where I think for the first time in my life, normally, like, I have like a personal group of friends that usually come around for these events, but now it's like everybody's like, do you want to get dinner? Do you want to do this? Do you want to get that? And I'm like, I only have 3 evenings, so I'm just trying to schedule and see as many people as I can. But you know, it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I found that it's the best to just not agree to anything and then wait till the actual things happen, and you're like, all right, I'm going to this one, and then just go. But you know, hey, it's not a bad problem to have, that's for sure. Now, I think it's a high time that the buds kind of get to know you, Roger, as one half of the Manor Podcast and a wonderful member of the community and a great player in your own right. Let's start at the beginning. When did TCGs come into your life?
When I was like 8 or 9. So I was born in 1990. So 1998, 1999, Pokemon, TCG, Yu-Gi-Oh! Hit the market. Prime target audience, waking up every Saturday morning for, you know, the cartoons and needing to, you know, see what's going to happen to Yugi or Ash on each new episode. So like as soon as those came out, I was immediately like just hooked. So I got like the first Yugi in Kaiba, you know, the starter decks with the Dark Magician and Blue Eyes White Dragon. And we sort of kind of figured out how the game worked, because you know, when you're like 9 or 10 years old and somebody just hands you a rule book and says play a game, you're mostly just going to play what you see on the TV. And the internet wasn't like a huge thing back then, so it was just like a lot of like, well, I don't really understand this part of the rules, let's just make it up as we go. And so that's kind of how I got exposed to it. And then as I got a little bit older, I got into Magic the Gathering a little bit, just like super casual kitchen table stuff. And then I fell out of TCGs basically through like all of high school. Just wasn't really my thing. I didn't have a lot of money in high school, so it's usually a pretty expensive hobby to maintain. And it wasn't until like my early 20s that I got back into Magic the Gathering, and I've just been a TCG addict, ever since.
Yeah, yeah. It is kind of funny that you mentioned that. I have a lot of guests who talk about the early days of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh. I clearly remember the same thing that you're talking about, where you don't know the rules, you're just playing it how you want to, and it made sense to like us 9-year-olds playing with each other, which is kind of fun. I almost get nostalgic for that in a way, but of course now, just I have to know the rules. It's just I need to. But now you're definitely on the competitive side of TCGs at this point in your life. Have you always had a hankering for the competitive side of things, inside or outside of TCGs?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So like I if like it doesn't have like a competitive aspect to it, I'm just not really interested in it as like a hobby. Even I played guitar for a long time in high school and in college, and like I was always trying to like improve, but it was to improve to like, go play at like a coffee shop or improve enough to like pick up chicks. And I met some of those goals. I won't say which ones. And so just anything I do, I usually want to make sure I have like a focus, like, and a reason that I'm doing it at the time. So whether that comes to like personal hobbies, my career, family, stuff like that, I would say I'm a pretty driven person overall. Like,
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, yeah, listen, you're the first person I've ever heard of that has, and I'm going to just say, I'm going to believe that you've mastered the art of picking up chicks with sellers of or not sellers of guitar. It's a wonderful skill, and we'll have to chat after the podcast about how you do that. No, I'm kidding.
I'm all washed up these days, so
Yeah.
happily married, have a baby upstairs. So
Yeah,
don't worry.
I have a relationship too. She's wonderful. I don't need to impress her anymore, though. She might, she gets a little too competitive when it comes to board games. So maybe I shouldn't get too good at it. But outside of TCGs, do you have any other games that you enjoy, or hobbies in general? You mentioned that you're into things that are competitive and that give you the drive. Do you find yourself playing any competitive video games or anything like that?
I wouldn't say they're like competitive, but like the really gritty, like super complicated RPGs and strategy games, like Fire Emblems, or like I guess like the JRPGs I really like, just because like it's just all math when you're sitting there. You're like, okay, well if I max this stat on this character, it'll carry over to like this thing on this boss fight, and then I'll get a multiply, and like I don't know, that's fun to me. I'd say that's like the most casual I get, but like I really like Go. I played some chess for a while. Um, Never amazing at either, but I think I got it good enough to be like medium. But yeah, I would say like as far as hobbies, that's about as far as it goes. Well, you have a baby and are editing a podcast and maintaining a full-time job.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, don't you have all the time in the world? Come on, man. No, understandable, and a lot of and I'm with you. I'm a huge Fire Emblem fan as well. Though I will say I'm not into the newer ones. I always enjoyed the Game Boy Advance ones. Those were
That's where I started.
yeah. That was like just prime Fire Emblem to me. But now Flesh and Blood, which funny enough, I think Flesh and Blood has a lot in common with Fire Emblem in a way, from a aesthetic way, and at least for those old Game Boy Advance ones. Now Flesh and Blood, we had your co-host on a few months ago, and it sounded like we have you to blame for the terror that is Michael Hamilton, the sweetest, most wonderful person ever. It's just this terror to the competitive scene. Can you tell us how you got into the game?
Sure. So Michael and I both played Magic the Gathering competitively, to varying degrees of success on our ends. And after the pandemic hit, WotC just kind of scrapped their whole organized play system and said, it's all online now. We don't care about physical cards anymore. And it is what it is. Boohoo, go play Commander if you want to keep playing Magic, is what it felt like they were saying to players like Michael and I. And I really didn't plan on like ever like finding the true like TCG love again. I was just like, it was fun in my 20s. I'll move on. But I heard rumblings that like this new game, like Flesh and Blood, it was like actually really fun. And the first thing I'll do for like any like game, honestly, and it might be like not be the healthiest thing to do, but I'll check the secondary market prices because that's basically how I can tell if there's actual demand for like a game. Because like if I go on, click on a new startup game and it's on TCG Player, but there's like one sold Mega Royal foil card for $100 6 months ago, but it's still listed as $100. I'm like, this game doesn't really seem super active, but like the secondary market seemed like really healthy at the time, and still to this day. Like there was the whole like first edition kerfuffle thing, but we moved past that actually pretty successfully. So then I looked at like the rules and I was like, okay, well I can't get mana screwed in this game, so that's a big plus. And I was like, what the hell? I'll buy one box of Welcome to Wraith and the Monarch starter decks, and we'll see what happens. And here we are, 2 years later.
Yeah. Now you mentioned the secondary market. Are you much of a collector yourself, or do you is that just to check if the game's being played and collected?
I collect some. So like Michael is incredibly stingy. So when I got into the game, what I had to do is I had to buy 2 play sets of every single card in order to basically let him play something if I wanted to play the same deck or the same cards at the same time. So I'm actually just now this weekend about to sell my excess Art of Wars because they're finally like back up in price. But yeah, I have a bunch of like seal product above me just hanging out up there. That's all like boxes of like Flesh and Blood, and there's some Magic up there too. Mostly like Jumpstart stuff because I just Jumpstart's the only Magic product like anymore. But yeah, I'm like a medium tier. Like I wouldn't say investor. I just like it. So. And prices usually go up over time, as we're seeing now with Welcome to Wraith. That product was stupid cheap for way too long.
Yeah.
And if it's like my favorite limited set, and I know I'm going to have nostalgia for it in like 5 years, I might as well just grab a couple cases so that way, like, if I was just like, hey, let's do a Welcome to Wraith draft in like 5 years from now, I just be like, okay, let me go get my box in instead of having to go to like eBay or TCG Play and paying like $1,000 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Now, is Michael using his own cards at this point, Roger? You can tell us.
Yeah, after he won the Calling Indianapolis, he traded his gold cold foil for basically an entire collection. Okay. So like his one like little card just paid for all of the other Flesh and Blood cards in the world.
Yeah. Well, must be nice, Michael. No, I'm kidding. But
good trade.
It's a good trade. It's a very good trade. Now, you got him into the game. That's what he had mentioned when he was on. Now, when did you know that you wanted this game to be a major part of your life? Because it is now, right? You create content for it. You travel to these events. When did you know that?
I would say after the Calling Cincinnati. I think that was like the first big event Michael and I went to. And, after playing at so many like Magic events over the years, playing an event that was like that, but smaller with like an actual like tight knit like community I was just like, there's something here. I could tell like there's something special about this game now. So much so that like a month after, the Calling in Cincinnati, Michael and I were just like, F it. Can we swear on this podcast?
Oh yeah, go for it.
we were like, fuck it. Let's just book a last minute flight to go to the Calling in Orlando. All the good players are going to be playing at Nationals that weekend. One of us has to win, and then he goes and wins the Calling in Orlando. So,
you hear that, folks? It's as easy as that. It just comes naturally to us podcasters. That's
the callings during national U.S. weekends are all real soft. Any idiot can top those.
Oh yeah. Now I do want to talk about podcasting. So you have the Manor podcast, and I would say it's an instant hit, right? You both, well, you can tell that you both are close friends, which I think is the first step for a podcast to be successful, right? You got to have the kind of the chemistry, and then obviously you both are very knowledgeable, and you both contribute in your own ways. I attribute mainly to your nice dulcet tones. They're very nice to listen to. And you have a natural ability to hold and steer a conversation. We even mentioned it before the podcast. I was like, oh, I got the reins now, but you get to relax. But can you tell us a little bit about the history of the podcast and how it came to be when you guys decided to make some content?
Yeah, so it was right after the first pro tour. Michael came home, and obviously Michael and I, you said, it's evident in the podcast that we're good friends, and to this day, we'll just sit and talk about Flesh and Blood like for like hours, like just genuine hours, like just like, oh well, what if we did this, or what about this, or we'll just be like, oh well, like what about how this event is going to go. It's just like we just could legitimately talk about the game for forever, and we just thought, well, what if we just recorded what our ramblings for like at least an hour at a time and see if anybody was interested in listening to it. And that's basically how it started. And even to like after the podcast, sometimes like we'll record for an hour, we'll hit the stop button, and I'll be like, oh, I actually wanted to talk about this, and we'll just talk for like another hour past recording.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a great sign, right? Because sometimes I don't want to say like other podcasts don't have that, but you can definitely tell that it's a conversation that you both want to have at all times, which is really great, and I think it's awesome. Now, outside of Flesh and Blood, are you a podcast listener?
A little bit. I listened to this one podcast, Fresh and Buds. It's pretty good. I don't know if you've heard of that one. I was not so much anymore. In my mid-20s, I would say I kind of fell down like that, like Duder podcast rabbit hole of like the Joe Rogan Experience and things like that. I don't listen to that so much anymore, but I just was down that podcast rabbit hole for a very long time. Now anything I listen to is like directly Flesh and Blood related.
Okay, yeah. So that's interesting that you mentioned that. A lot of folks are introduced to podcasting through like comedians and or even like the true crime era of the world. That corner I've never really delved down, but a lot of people love it. I just wonder, because listening to you, I can tell that you have a natural knack for podcasting, and I was wondering if it was coming from anywhere else. Now, I've never heard this Fresh and Bloods podcast. I'll be honest with you, I've never listened to it, but but only when I'm editing it, of course. But but it is it definitely shows that you know what you're doing in the podcast realm, and I just thought it'd be. I want the folks to know that, right? For anybody who hasn't listened to the Manor podcast, I think you really should start listening. Roger and Michael know what they're doing. So, that being said, are there any big plans for the podcast in 2023 in terms of even just content in general?
So we're about to hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, probably within the next like week or so. We're at like 915. So we're gonna do a 1,000 subscriber, special episode. We'll probably give away. We have like a bunch of the Manor sleeves that Michael has used, like, and all that stuff. We have like 8 or 9 boxes of those 100 count sleeves to give away, just random people. Some other goodies we'll probably do as well. Maybe I'll bust open one of those cases up there and give something out. And we'll just do like a big celebration event for it. And then as far as like content extra going, we're pretty open to the idea. You shouted out your Patreon at the start, but we also have a Patreon where we do like weekly episodes of like Manor University. We'll just watch a game together and talk about the plays, what we think is going on, what we like and what we don't like. And if there was ever like a demand, if people are like, Roger, Michael, you should really do like X, Y, and Z, like I think we'd probably be into it, as long as it's not casting. I've had people come up to be like, oh, you're so good on the podcast and we love your dulcet tones. You should come do casting for us. And I'm like, I can't. I'd like competing too much at this point in time. And so that's just kind of where I don't ever see myself getting into like the casting side of things, at least not anytime soon.
Yeah, well, that's fair, because I mean, that is, if you go into that side of things, it is just, that's all you can really do. I mean, sure, you could play sometimes, but if it's something you're good at, people are going to keep wanting you to do it, right? So now here's the question. You said if there's anything that people, have, ask if there's a demand for, well, hot tub streams. What do you think about that, Roger?
We'd have to get a hot tub first. If Michael wins Worlds again, he could probably afford a hot tub for us, and we can start doing some hot tub streams.
Oh, that'd be great. Great Patreon content. Can't be putting that out for free. That's for sure.
Yeah. And then we could sell the Michael Hamilton hot tub water. Bottle that, and there we go.
Jeez, well, you know what? Send me an early order form because I'm buying it. Now,
you two can win the world championship with this hot tub water.
This hot tub water. Yeah, extra chlorine. Now, this is my favorite part of the episode or the show that I do, this podcast, Fresh Faves, where I'm going to ask you a few of your favorite things in the game, and hopefully you answer them. It's going to range from heroes to cards. If you're ready, I will start asking.
Go for it.
First, who is your favorite hero?
Bolton. It's not even close.
Why is that?
So fundamentally, Michael looks at everything like this, like very exchange rate, that's his claim to fame. And Bolton says like, fuck that. Get that all out of here. Come in with your 2-card 3s. Michael's like you got to get 4-card 12s. Bolton's like, no. Cast Engulfing Light and just throw a card away. And maybe in like 2 or 3 turns, that card will combine to like an infinite combo, or not an infinite combo, but it's a combo deals like between like 30 to 50 damage. I love that combo. That combo is like my favorite thing to do in Flesh and Blood, because the game engine of Flesh and Blood is so restrictive in like a good way. Like it's not easy to like do extra actions in a turn or draw extra cards or like really like break the system. So anytime a deck gets to do that, I'm all about it. And that's why like I guess Bolt's my favorite hero now, but Skeletal Visceri was like my favorite deck of all time. Like during the last calling in Indy, even though Starvo was running around being broken Starvo, I was still like, nah. We're going to build up 20 Rune Chants. We're going to cast a Snot Arcanics for, look at 10 cards, and I'm going to flip over 9 attack actions because that's just how my weekend went. But, it could have worked out differently. And I just love that deck. That deck was sweet.
So what you're telling me is you like to do disgusting broken things
in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, only in Flesh and Blood, of course. Now, what is your favorite weapon?
I would say it's probably Centauri Saber, just because it's the weapon that I think I will always have to explain no matter what happens ever in the world, especially while you're playing on Bolton, because you're like, okay, it's going to get +1 counter. It's going to get +1/+1 from Bolton's ability, since I charge this turn if you block with attack action. But it also has its innate ability to, if you block with attack action. So it's actually going to get +2/+2. So your 2 block attack that you just blocked with has 0 block, basically. You're like, oh. And it's just, I don't know. It's just fun.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it allows for broken things like that. And it's just, there's actually like a lot of really cool things you can do with Centauri Saber that's not just the combo, which is probably the coolest thing about that weapon. So totally acceptable answer. Next, which is your favorite equipment?
For sticking on theme here would be Courage of Bladehold, right? I think it's the most broken piece of equipment left in the game at the moment. At least has the potential to be. So I think in much the same way Skeletta put like a cap on the design space on what they could do for like Rune Blade cards, as far as like their costing X and stuff like that. I think Courage of Bladehold puts a cap on how far they can push like weapons, especially one-handed weapons in this game, where if they allow more like 1-cost weapon sword attacks and things like that to come into the game, you really have to be careful, because there's just always Courage of Bladehold to come in to just make those free for a whole turn cycle, and who knows how powerful that could be.
Yeah, even beyond just combo, you can just close out games with Dorinthia and some other busted stuff. So yeah, it is one of those cards that, like, when I'm building decks, I wish it said axes too, because I like the axes better. But
for sure.
But I understand why they left it to just swords. Now, what is your favorite run-of-the-mill card, your attack actions, your non-attack actions, your instants, the cards that you throw into your deck?
Lumina Ascension. Or Beacon. One of the two. Pick the two. Beacon's always getting Lumina Ascension though, so.
Yeah, almost always, yeah. I have started seeing folks grab the new
Spirit
item with it. Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah.
It's a great answer. Do you care to explain why, Roger?
Just because, like, as I was saying, the 2-card 3s that Bolton has to put up with on like his average turn cycle, I think one of my favorite things to do is like play Bolton on like Talishar, because like it breaks down your turn by turn numbers and then it gives you an average at the end. So like Bolton looks like 3, 0, 3, 2, 1, 37, average damage per turn 15, and you're like, oh, I'm like way above rate on my average turn because this one turn was so broken.
That's I mean, it's so incredible. Bolton, I think, is close to having its day, and we'll find out now as we talk about the Calling Indianapolis in your home state of Indiana. Roger,
Mhm.
are you? So you're stoked for this weekend, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to ask you what you're playing, but if you want to tell us what you're playing, you can tell us.
Sure. So it's not going to be much of a secret. On Friday, Michael and I are going to release this week's episode, and we actually just talk about like hashing out how we're going to build our Icelander decks. And we're like, if this was a Pro Tour or Worlds, there's no way in hell do something like this. But
Mhm.
for a calling, we're two people ultimately in the calling, and I think we even talk about this on the podcast where we could try to be like we're going to affect the meta at a certain point one way or another. So we could either like lie and try to like deceptively affect the meta at this point, or we can just be like, this is what we're doing, this is what we're playing. If you want to try to pick a deck that single-handedly counters the Manor podcast this weekend, go for it, because there's still going to be a field of like 500 other players you're going to have to contend for. So yeah, we're just both on Icelander. Surprise.
Yeah, not a huge surprise there. And you know what? I do respect the fact that you're willing to kind of just say, hey, this is what we're doing. I think that, sure. It when it gets to Worlds Pro Tour, maybe don't say, hey, this is what we're doing. But you do, like you said, you do have the option to say this is what we're doing, but not really. We're just trying to trick you. And I think you guys are making the right decision in not doing that, because I think you don't want to lose trust in your listeners or even just the community in general. So props to you. Now, you recently talked to Michael on the Manor podcast about your thoughts on the bans. We had a huge ban announcement, which I haven't had a chance to talk about on this show because if I recorded 2 days before they came out last week, which was just great.
I would have loved to hear what Dagan had to say about that, so that's unfortunate. But
yeah, well, I mean, he's been pretty vocal on Twitter, so that's nice. At least he's in the tank trying to figure out what he's doing with his life now that Oldham's been hit so hard. Now the bans were Winter's Whale. It was Belittle, and the suspensions were Hypothermia and Amulet of Ice until Icelander hits Living Legend. Now, could you summarize your thoughts on those bans for us today?
They just wanted Briar to Living Legend. Because I think that's the consensus right now, and part of the reason why we're playing Icelander this weekend is, since they just lowered the power level of both the other premier aggro deck in the format of Phi and all the ice decks that were also, typically also holding down a deck like Briar over the past few months, they're just nerfed now, so they're going to have a harder time doing that. There's no reason that Briar shouldn't just like pick up her last few Living Legend points, and then it just be like the world's like super open meta. But we just need Briar to get out of here first, so we'll see.
And that does bring up a nice little conversation, right? So, Tales of Aria, right? No doubt and they even admit it in the article. It's a set that really pushed boundaries. They had to ban Duskblade before it even saw the light of day. Now the other majestic weapon, Winter's Whale, is getting banned, and on top of that, we have a weapon called Rosetta Thorn, right? That for some reason is just Runeblade and not Elemental Runeblade, but for whatever reason, we don't know. Do you think Rosetta Thorn has too much power and the Runeblades will be a little bit more balanced going forward once Briar LLs?
I would say so. And I think so if we look at it like contextually in like just Tales of Aria, like in its own nutshell and like its limited format, there was no arcane barrier in that format. So Rosetta Thorn was just like the most powerful weapon far and away, no matter what was going on in that limited format. So you had to have like a really good reason or a really good way to keep Briar down, or that weapon was just going to kill you. And there was literally nothing you can do about it. And that's just because of that 2 arcane damage. And like, I think it'd be fine. It'd be fine if it was still just like 1 cost 3 and like 1 extra arcane damage if you played an attack and non-attack action, I think it'd be fine. But the fact that it hits that 2/2 breakpoint, so there's like you can't put a 3 block in front of it and then like arcane barrier 1, and you can't like arcane barrier 2, and decks don't really want to run arcane barrier 2 into rune blades because they just don't really have very many instances of arcane barrier, and they're still presenting a lot of like good physical on-hit attacks that you want like real equipment to block with. So I think it just taxes decks like both like hand resources and equipment resources just in a way that's not super healthy. So yeah, it'll be nice once it's gone.
Yeah, it will be nice, and it's unfortunate because it is flavorful, right? At least from a flavor standpoint, it looks like Briar should be swinging that thing. However, it does not look like Chain or Viscera should have been swinging that thing, but they are. So I think from a lot of standpoints in the game, not only power level, but just like it making sense. Like I think if I was a new player and I looked at the pool of cards and I saw Rosetta Thorn, I think I'm immediately like, that's just a Briar weapon, right? It's not. And that's the unfortunate thing about it. And hopefully, I imagine we're going to get those living legend points. I'd be hard pressed that it won't happen before Outsiders. Now, we've talked about, well, we know what you're playing, Icelander, and we talked about how powerful Briar is now that those decks have been kind of tempered. What else are you guessing that we as players will run into this weekend?
Dash was another hero that like struggled into the ice heroes, and specifically like instant speed hypothermia was a big problem for a deck that's just trying to give out their cards to go again. Go figure. So that matchup gets a lot harder for Icelander, and that makes that deck, still capable of racing with almost any other aggressive deck in the format. So I think that deck is also going to pop up a lot. And I think the Guardian players are still just going to Guardian. So Michael and I are on the testing team, the Wolf Pack, with like Zach Bunn and just a bunch of other people. And there's just a dedicated group of guys that are just like, yeah, we're just going to keep figuring out old time. And so they're just, in the lab right now trying to figure out how to resuscitate this hero. So I think last week on the cast, we said like old time's in D tier, but that was a little bit too much of a hot take. We had some hot takes on that episode.
That's okay.
And
We love hot takes.
so he's probably, still a very competent hero. And I don't know which between the two Guardians is like actually better now though. So if you wanted to play a Guardian and you played Bravo or Oldtime, I think both are like perfectly functional heroes to take to the calling to.
Sure. Now, here at Fresh and Builds, we love dark horses, right? My love for Levias is certainly apparent, but of course, there's going to be a couple of Levias running around this weekend. Maybe me. I haven't decided yet. I haven't. For those of you who haven't listened, basically, I haven't had time to build a deck, but it will come to me in a dream, hopefully tonight. What are some other dark horse decks you expect to do well this weekend?
So, if an Azalea deck can like figure out how to like really punish a Briar deck, like with her dominate effects, Briar's good at like blocking with one like action or not attack actions for like 4. But if you can give that attack dominate to go over that 4 breakpoint and then like hit her with like red in the ledgers or things like that and just make it so like she can't play a functional game, I could see a world where Azalea or Lexi, or Lexi's ability to go wide and just really tax like these aggressive decks. So I think Rangers are like pretty good dark horse bets, I would say.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of talk about Reinar right now. And I think Reinar maybe looked a little bit better before the bans, but certainly I think, in my opinion, I think a lot of people are going to show up with Dromai. I think Dromai, really didn't get hit at all, and maybe he's almost in a better spot. We will see. Depends on how that Briar matchup is. I guess it's not quite as atrocious as it is against Viscera with all the on hits. But do you see Reinar kind of rising to the top this weekend?
I think Reinar, despite getting the help from the Dynasty set, like I think he's still just like a half step too slow. And basically what that comes down to is that like the good decks in Flesh and Blood are either majorly disrupting their opponent by like disruptive effects like Channel Lake Frigid or just like presenting hard to interact with damage like arcane damage, or they're presenting very powerful on hits that are also then either trying to give them additional advantages in the game, like drawing extra cards, getting extra resources, or forcing your opponent to discard cards, or punishing effects, command and conquer, trying to take away your arsenal. Reiner doesn't do any of those two things. He just presents normal, somewhat hard to block, just physical damage. And it's above, like, at his peak, it's like above rate physical damage.
Sure.
But he still can't do anything. So, like, infamously, if a hero doesn't want to block, his hero ability doesn't do anything anyways. So if I'm a Briar opponent and I'm like, okay, my hand's worth like 25 damage, and if I don't block, oh, you're attacking me for 20 damage. Okay, I'll take this 20, I'll deal 25 back, and then your next hand only deals like 10, where mine is another just average Briar hand that deals like 20 damage again. Like, I'm just gonna have more consistent damage output than you in the long run.
Yeah, that's totally fair, especially, it seems like the meta has suddenly gotten a little bit faster, right? And I think Reiner was probably in a better spot before where there's a lot of guardians, and Intimidate is good against something that wants to block, as it goes the other way, as you just said. But notable,
I think he's also really good into Icelander, for what it's worth.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe you don't want to see any Reiners this weekend. What do you think?
Not ideally.
So I'm sleeving it up right after this. Hopefully, round 1, me and you, Roger. Now, I'm sure you beat me anyway. But notably missing from this conversation right now is Bolton. What's going on with that? You're speaking Bolton's praises in the fresh phase. Where is Bolton in this conversation for the calling Indianapolis?
So my Bolton hype was outdated at this point. So in that infamous calling in Orlando that Michael won, where Lightning Briar was broken, I was playing Sir Bolton, and I finished in the top 16. I think I was one match short of top 8, and that's just because I was just comboing Briars left and right all weekend long. And I was like, oh, this matchup's sweet. Like, I think this is like an actively good matchup for Bolton. And it was at the time. And lo and behold, 15 months later, Briar's changed a lot, where Bolton really hasn't. And it turns out once you take out 9 ball lightnings that don't block, and the lightning presses that don't block, and you put in a bunch of big bulky earth cards that do block very well, it's a lot harder to combo that hero. And it's still presenting a lot of damage very quickly. And so you don't have the time, because like against a deck like Dash, it's a lot of damage very quickly, but it's not actually, I would say, as much as the average output like Briar has, especially if he sees like 2 Channel Mount Heroics in the first couple turn cycles of the game. So like I think Dash is like the damage output that has like a favorable Bolton like matchup. Like I would take, if everybody was on Dash this weekend, I would snap take Bolton, not even close. But just Briar's damage output and her ability to block is just one step above that, I would say. And I tested heavily into Briar Wednesday this week, and I think I went like 0-6, 0-7, and I put the deck down. So if I expect Briar to be the most played deck, I can't take a deck that I just don't feel like can actually beat Briar, like
Sure.
reasonably.
Now, so that means that you do feel that Icelander has what it takes to beat Briar.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that matchup's still very, very good, as we saw in the World Championship.
Who played in that? And now, a question for you in terms of Dromai, right? So I think I think we can call them the Dromai players, the fans, the Dragon's Brood at this point. They seem to be, feeling pretty high and mighty right now. They feel like Dromai's in a great spot. Do you agree? And what are your thoughts on the viability of Dromai going forward as the remaining illusionist in CC?
Yeah, so I guess I was also quite the Prism stan. So I played Prism for quite a while. So I love illusionists. And I think I've been pretty adamant on the cast, though, that Dromai, I think, was maybe taken down one too many power levels from Prism. Like, I don't think the dragon should have Spectra by any stretch of the imagination. But I think the aggressive decks are just too easily able to like take advantage of like the extra on hits that they get from hitting those dragons. They're very difficult to like keep in play a lot of the time, and I don't see that changing. And especially on like turn cycles where like Briar has Channel Mount Heroic in play, it's still the case that like if you attack with a dragon and they just block with like literal and every single card in their deck's a popper that turn cycle. So there's really not anything you can do like to try to pressure them, it feels like, once they put down a Channel Mount Heroic. And if that's the case, then they're just free to like keep their hand and then just wallop you back with damage. So I by no means either a Briar or a Dromai expert. I would just think in theory it would be pretty Briar favored. And I think Phi will still be floating around like somewhere. And so I think Dromai just needs a little bit more help, I would say, I guess, before I would consider to be like a tier 1 viable hero.
Sure. And have you seen, and I'm sure you have, this Iris Dromai that's been floating around, which feels like you're playing against Prism in a way. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think, some folks have had some good results with the deck, right, in the ProQuest season? Now saying that ProQuests are a different beast than something like a Calling. How do you feel about that deck as someone who used to play a lot of Prism?
I think it's good, and I think, well, I guess at a higher level, I think it'd be interesting if heroes had more options to build than just kind of like the default like stock list that people usually fall into, because I think that's one of the most interesting things about Flesh and Blood, where when you sit down against a hero, you have to sideboard and make a game plan first. And for a while, Lexi was one of those heroes, because you're like, well, I don't know if this is Ice Lexi or Lightning Lexi, and like those decks play like fundamentally like different game plans. And like if you like board thinking like, oh yeah, I'm going to need all these energy potions and stuff like that, all these extra blues in order to deal with all these frostbites that I'm getting, and then all of a sudden Lightning Lexi's just pushing a million damage at your face every turn, and you're staring at epots in your hand, you're like, oh, I'm being very heavily punished here. And that's what I think. So I like that Dromai can have this alternate game plan that people aren't really like necessarily gonna 100% know, like, oh, she's just gonna play a bunch of dragons, I just need my poppers, and all of a sudden this Iris of Reality, I think Dromiris is what people are calling it, comes in and just like, okay, well, cool poppers, here's this aura, like it doesn't do anything, and people are like, oh, oops. So I wish more heroes had like options to kind of like play like different game plans like that.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think that is, well, it's something that as we get more printing of new stuff, we'll probably get more of it, and it's mainly weapons, right? Weapons can change up anything, right? And we've seen that. I play a lot of brute claws versus club or meat axe now. Meat axe is the heat these days, and it changes a little bit, right? You can't really run fatigue on meat axe, but you could try. It won't work. But unless you like a ton of rejuvenate or reincarnates in your deck, which I don't want to be doing anyway. But all that being said, Levia. I'm a huge Levia fan and player.
Okay.
And we haven't talked about Levia as something that we're going to run into this weekend, probably for good reason. Now, this question is not necessarily geared towards, are we going to see a lot of Levia? Is Levia going to be good? I want to know if, folks like yourself and your team ever take the second to say, what about Levia? Should we explore this? Because it is a lower tier hero. It's like right there with Azalea, even though Azalea is going to get a lot more heat soon. But currently they're neck and neck.
Yeah, so we have a team Discord, and every single hero is listed out that's currently legal in Classic Instructed in the team Discord. And I would say, obviously, some heroes have more activity than others, but I think every hero gets at least discussed, or like if a random deck list pops up, we'll at least like post it and shoot some messages about it and talk about it. And Stephen Woolley is on the team, and we're both kindred spirits when it comes to Bolton, but he doesn't just only love Bolton. He loves, I think, like all of the less loved heroes, to put it politely, of Flesh and Blood. So he'll be active in like Rhinar and Levia and Azalea, like along with me, but I just interact with them the most in Bolton. So yeah, we definitely have people talking about all the different heroes. Not all the time, but I would say somewhat regularly.
I do want to say that less loved is such a nice way to put it, and it also it's probably the only LL that a lot of those heroes are going to get for a long time. So
Levia LL'd.
LL less loved. Not by me, girl, but I still love you. But no, it's good to hear. I mean, I tested with some folks for nationals, and I mean, I played Levia, so it was I was the one talking about it mostly, but it seems it's good to know at least she's getting talked about, So now,
yeah, because it's not like those heroes don't do anything powerful.
Yeah.
That's not the case. It's just about like consistency, and is their powerful thing as powerful as the other powerful things that are happening like in the meta at the moment. And it just turns out that like the less loved heroes just are either are both not as consistent or as like high of peaks as like just other heroes in the format right now. So we'll see but that can change at a moment's notice. So
yeah, it takes just one card. Honestly, it can take just one card. So we will see. Now, Indianapolis, it's a city in the Midwest, in Indiana, where this tournament will be. I'm very good at geography. What's some stuff that folks can do? Because you're from Indiana. What are some things that folks can do outside of the convention center? That maybe you enjoy.
Small correction. I'm actually from Cleveland, Ohio. I moved to
Oh.
Indiana in 2019. So I've lived here for a number of years, and I still know a lot about the city. But I was born and raised in Cleveland, so I like to say my personality reflects that.
Is that a good or bad thing? I'm not sure.
It's just a giant a garbage fire. Cleveland's famous for the river that lit on fire. So
yeah. That's amazing. So, as a transplant in Indiana from Cleveland, Ohio, what are some things that you like to do in Indianapolis?
So we have a couple of really good like breweries that are around town. In downtown Indianapolis, actually the headquarters of a brewery called Sun King. I used to moonlight there for a while after like pre-pandemic. I would work like my 9 to 5, and then I would just like go and just hang out and serve beers at not that Sun King, but a different location. They have like a phenomenal selection of beers, all locally brewed, obviously like down in the heart of like Indianapolis. They do tours. I think you have to schedule them pretty far in advance. So maybe next time you're in town, I would highly recommend like scheduling a tour. They take you through like their entire facility and give you samples of everything along the way. It's great. Food wise, there's some. I don't know how big of a chain this is. I don't remember it in Ohio, but have you ever heard of like a chain called Yats?
Never in my life. No.
It's like a Creole kind of like down south Louisiana cooking.
Ooh.
So, but like Chipotle formed. So it's like this like really interesting combination of ideas, and it's like my favorite like go to like lunch or like Chipotle-esque kind of like restaurant to go to. So YATS is just called Yats. Really like those places. They're all around like the Indianapolis area at least. So I would highly recommend checking out one of those. And then like the go-to the default thing is everybody's like, oh, there's a really good steakhouse downtown called like St. Elmo's. It's okay. Like it's just like it's a steakhouse. But if you want to go there, but you don't feel like waiting in line or necessarily dealing with like, because it's a fairly small restaurant, they have an offshoot called Harry and Izzy's, and it's like the exact same shit, all this like everything, but it's just like in a bar atmosphere. And it might be hard to get into Saturday night, but that's where the Wolfpack is. We have like a reservation for 12 there because like it's just what everybody wants. But it's like it's going to the best restaurant, but not having to deal with the bullshit hassle of dealing with everything that the best restaurant entails.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the bar atmosphere, I think, is better regardless.
For sure.
And that's awesome. Now, I'm excited to check out Sun King, friend of the show and host of Flesh and Pod Logan Peterson loves that brewery. He's always talking about it. I do want to check it out. This time I'm in Indy, so hopefully get over there. Now, before we say our goodbyes, Roger, Outsiders. I want to get some speculation, some hot takes about Outsiders, to put a little button on this show from you.
Sure.
What are your thoughts about Outsiders? And we have the proposed draft format where you could play 2 of any of the classes. It seems kind of cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think LSS will have like actually had to have like worked hard to have fucked up that limited format. Just because the main complaint that everybody had about Uprising Draft was like you just felt like you were on rails by like pick 5, because it's like either you're the ninja, you're the draconic like illusionist, or you're Icelander, and like none of those card pools interacted. And kind of like also I was talking about in like classic constructed, like, you know, if decks are kind of like always doing like this one certain thing, you know what to be expecting. But now if like in both limited and classic or any constructed format, you can think like, oh, well, I'm playing against a ranger, but are they splashing like the ranger assassin cards? Are they like employing like this other like weird niche strategy like that they get to like splash or include or like kind of go for alternative game plans? Like that's something I think is like desperately needed in a game of Flesh and Blood. And I think not only like dual class cards like that, but I think concepts like the Emperor, I think that was just like a teaser taste. And the more that they can do like I think everybody wants like a mechanologist warrior when we go to metrics, like those kinds of like actual like dual class heroes as well. I think they kind of have to keep a somewhat tight lid on it, because you don't want like a mechanologist warrior then to be able to splash the warrior assassin cards and or like the mechanologist like ranger cards, and then like it can definitely get like too spread out. But I think for now I would encourage them to like make the game a little less restrictive with the class-based system than it is now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the most funs I've had playing the game. You know, I've had fun playing the game, no matter what. But it is what the hell is it called? It's Shapeshifter Sealed.
Shyana?
Yeah, Shapeshifter Sealed, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So same thing. But just kind of like, oh, let's see what happens if we mix around. I played a Shapeshifter Sealed game where I was Bolton. I had 2 Titan's Fists, and you can give it go again, because if you pitch the 3, it was kind of cool. So you can go 4/4, which is kind of neat. And that was like a lot of fun. Obviously, I don't want Flesh and Blood to turn into that, but no, I agree with you. This kind of dual class thing is going to be interesting to play around with, and I think the most it's going to help is limited, and the odds are that it could only really hurt CC if they go crazy with it, but I don't think they will. I mean, based on the 1 card we saw so far, it doesn't look like, oh, this has to be in every single assassin or ninja deck or whatever it was.
That's a hell of a card, though. That card's like, I think that card's very good, and that card will see a lot of play. I could tell like they put that as like their premier card to like showcase the set. Yeah,
I mean, the card is cool. I think it's, I don't know, if to me it feels like a kind of like a Thoughtseize to kind of shout out the game that I don't play anymore. But hey, who knows? We might find out something about the Outsiders this weekend in Indy. I think someone had hinted at that. I do not know if that's true, but we will know this weekend. However, I want to know what you think Riptide does, because Riptide, big, gross-looking ranger guy, has like hooks and killing people, and he starts at a lower life. What is it about this gross ranger that makes him so good he needs to start at 38 health?
So he's a trap-based hero, right? So if they're just going to let you play traps as though like you didn't have to put them into your arsenal, and then they like push like traps to like a real level in Outsiders, I could see that definitely being like something that they'd want to keep in check, because obviously traps are defense reactions, and you wouldn't want a hero sitting on 1 million defense reactions at 40 life, because they would just be like really, really, really hard to kill at that point. So maybe they're like, oh, he's actually too good. And we kept dealing 38 damage to Riptide through all of his trap-based defense reactions. Well, okay, just put him at 38 life instead of reworking him. Maybe that's what they went with.
Yeah, could be. I'm excited to see what he does, just because he looked like a brute, and he's not, but I'll probably still play him. Now, this has been a lot of fun, Roger. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
That was a blast.
I would love for you to plug everything that you need to plug. I know we talked about the Manor podcast, but plug it away and plug your socials and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, so Manorcast, we're on all the major podcasting channels, RSS feed, Spotify, all that good stuff. YouTube, obviously, like I said, we're just short of 1,000 subscribers there. On YouTube, we do like video stuff, so you get to see Michael's amazing face as you're listening to the podcast. And then Patreon, www.com/Patreon, or www.patreon.com/MNRcast. We do weekly videos for Manor University, like I said, where we just do breakdown of games. If you're actually a $20 and above tier, you can submit your games. If you like record your game on Talishar and you're like, hey, Michael and Roger, here's this game that I played on Talishar that was interesting. Will you like let me know what I could have done better? We'll watch it and cover it on the channel. And then at $70 a month, you get one-on-one coaching from the champ of Michael Hamilton once a month. So those are the different tiers we have at the moment.
Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. I will say that. Now, this has been a lot of fun, Roger. You can all still find me on Twitter at FreshBudsPod, and the YouTube. Give us the old like, comment, subscribe. Trying to build up those YouTube numbers. Ever since I moved this to video, things have been going well, I think. And people are tuning in a little bit more on the YouTube. Though I still love my audio listeners out there on Spotify, Apple, and all those fun things. If you listen to Fresh and Buds or the Manor podcast on any of those platforms, please leave a review. Give it a little rate on Spotify. You can give it 1 out of 5 stars. I encourage that. It helps us become more discoverable when new people are coming into this game, which there's going to be a lot of people coming into this game because Outsiders looks like it's going to be a blast and things are only going well for Flesh and Blood. When people come into the game, I know I looked for podcasts right away. Flesh and Blood podcast, get Fresh and Buds and Manor podcast as the first ones to show up by rating it and all that stuff. So now, Roger, I like to end every episode talking about food. And today I made the wise decision to eat dinner before I recorded the podcast so I wouldn't get extremely starving while my guests told me about some food they wanted to talk about. But the floor is yours, Roger, to talk about some food that you're really enjoying.
So I actually cook quite a bit, and I'm a vegetarian now, but before I was like vegetarian a couple years ago. Like I was going like deep in the tank, like sous vide stuff, like just doing like crazy cookbook stuff. I've dialed it back now. I would say my favorite thing, like my favorite comfort food to make is like mac and cheese, but it's not that like never give me Kraft like mac and cheese out of a box. No, you start with a roux, and then you freshly shred some like some kind of brand of sharp cheddar. We usually go to like the fancy cheese section, and I'm like, ooh, this is like a sharp cheddar from Australia this week. Give me some of that. And so then we melt that down and put that in a mac and cheese, and some nice like varied cheeses. Mac and cheese is kind of like my favorite like once a week comfort food that I'll make right now.
Sounds pretty good. Do you bake your mac and cheese? Typically
you can.
Yeah.
I don't typically do it, but I have in the past, and you need to put the breadcrumbs on top. We have a Dutch oven. That's usually what I make the roux in and stuff like that. So it's pretty easy to just bake it from there, but I don't normally have the patience. I'm just like, I need to eat this now. We serve it.
Now here's the last question of the day. You say mac and cheese, and I remember growing up, maybe my mom doesn't listen to this, but I don't know if my mom's mac and cheese was the best. And if you hear this, Mom, I love you. Sorry. But to ease the pain of eating that mac and cheese, I would use ketchup. What is your thoughts on using ketchup with mac and cheese? Because I don't think it's that uncommon.
No, I don't think it's that uncommon, especially like I think like another common thing that I don't know if your house did this, hot dogs and mac and cheese, staple. The hot dogs, Kraft mac and cheese, breakfast of 10-year-old champions, or dinner of 10-year-old champions. But adult, my tip would be paprika. Get like a good brand of like a smoked paprika, and then that's your seasoning. You use like 2 tablespoons or 2 teaspoons, not tablespoons, don't go crazy. 2 teaspoons of paprika with just like a simple salt and pepper base on like your roux, and then like that's it. Like the sharp cheddar will just carry the rest of the taste, and you're good to go.
Sounds amazing, Roger. It sounds so good. All right, this has been a wonderful episode of Fresh and Buds. I hope everyone had a blast listening, and I hope everybody has a blast hanging out in Indianapolis this weekend. I'm excited. I better see you there, Roger. I'm gonna find you and play Reinar against your Icelander. I swear. No, I'm kidding.
Look forward to it.
I will be in the O2 bracket. But everybody, please have a great week.